everything that you see is free, and you'll have a link in the description to what you're going to get. You'll have pickups, you'll have InventoryUI. You can click on the items in the inventory and it'll reduce the amount that you have. And that's it. So let's get started. Now we're in Unity 2019.3. We've got a sample scene set up. We're going to go ahead and right click UI and choose a new canvas. All right. And as soon as we get that, we're going to go ahead and change to scale with screen size, and we'll put that in full HD, which is 1920 by 1080. And what that'll do is when we change when we change devices, right, it'll scale depending on the screen size. So let's take an example of that. Let's put our panel down here. We're going to right click and create a new panel, and this will be the background for our inventory. All right. Now I'm in a portrait mode for a phone. I'm going to go back to full HD, and I'm going to put this panel right here in the bottom left corner of my screen, of my canvas. All right. I'm going to change my anchors as well. Okay, so I'm going to put these anchors down here so that the image or the panel will always be in that spot. All right, and it'll scale depending on those anchors. Okay, so let's go back to our game. We can change the type of view, and you can see that even if we go into portrait mode of a phone, we still have this panel in the bottom left of the screen. Okay, so it is important that you have your render mode, your UI scale mode set to scale with screen size. Okay, now inside the panel we are going to child a new scroll view. And as scroll view, we will resize that as well. And I'm going to put the anchors at 0.1 on both the min X and min Y, and then 0.9 on the maxes. Okay, and then I'm going to zero out on left, top, right, and bottom. Okay, so now whenever we scale our panel, the scroll view scales with us. The the scroll bar horizontal, we won't need that today. We're going to just scroll vertically, and in content we're going to want to add a vertical layout group. We will use child scale on the width and the height. Okay, and we will place those objects in the center of the content panel. Okay, so to visualize this, we're going to go ahead and create a couple of buttons here. All right, now we're going to press play, and we're going to see how this scroll wheel feels. And we've got it set to elastic mode, so when we move it, it'll snap back to where it started. And I don't want that. We're going to want to go back to scroll view, the scroll rect. We're going to change movement type to unrestricted, and we're going to change scroll sensitivity to 10. Okay, we'll go back to play mode. I'm going to scroll first. Okay, so I'm scrolling, that's pretty decent, and then I'm just moving it around. It's unrestricted, so yeah, it has some inertia. It'll keep going, but now I can leave it there and choose these options from the bottom, where I couldn't do that before. So make sure you set scroll rect, movement type to unrestricted. Okay. Now, go ahead and delete all those buttons. We're going to create a container for our item slot. So, this item slot will contain all of our item UI. So we call this an item container. And we're going to go ahead and add a button to that. I use TextMeshPro, so I'm going to create a button TextMeshPro. You don't have to. I just think that the TextMeshPro buttons look a lot better than do the standard texts. So I'm going to resize that. I'm going to put it just at the top and leave about 20% of the bottom for the name of the item. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this and put it down at the bottom. All right, and I'm going to change my anchors too. So I can see that my min is 0.26. So I'm going to go ahead and set my max at 0.26 and then change my min to 0. And that way we'll have the bottom until the next button up. All right, and we're going to change the text to item name just to default to that for now. We're going to auto size that. We'll go from 8 to 96. And we'll give a little padding on the left and the right. Okay, we'll go ahead and change this to item name background. And that looks good. We can go ahead and delete the text on the button. We're going to copy this. We're going to duplicate it. All right, so I pressed Control D on Windows, and I'm going to move this up to the bottom right corner of the item button. Okay, so this is going to hold our count. It'll hold the count for the number of items that we have here. What is going on there with these anchors? So I'm moving these anchors so that it's always at the bottom right corner there. I'm going to change the text to 0, and I am going to put count background on the parent of that text. Okay, so this looks pretty good for a container. We're going to go ahead and prefab that, drag it into your project folder, and that'll be a prefab. We're going to go ahead and right click new folder, scripts. We're going to right click folder and prefabs. We can drop that into the prefabs. Now we're going to want some UI for our items. I'm going to go ahead and create an item placeholder. So I'm going to right click 3D object and create a cube. Okay, so I'll reset that position, and I'm going to get out of 2D mode. I'm going to go to the cube, and I'm going to place a canvas on it, and I'm going to make it into a world canvas. So I go to the canvas render mode, and I change it to world space. I'm going to have to change its position, so I change position X, Y, Z to 0, and I'm going to change its width and height to 1, and then I'll give it a vertical offset just above the box. I'll put the main camera into the event camera on the canvas. Make sure I have main camera on my camera here. Main camera tag. Okay. Now here on the canvas, we're going to child an image to it, so UI image. And we're going to change its size to 1, 1. So width of 1, height of 1, and it will be a child of this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bring in a couple of sprites. These are all free sprites. Excuse me, I got them at Flat Icon. I think they're pretty good. Obviously, you don't have to use these, but I thought they looked pretty decent for this. I'm going to change these into texture type sprite 2D UI and press apply. Now let's say that I wanted to have my key here. I can put that in, I can put that into the source image of the image there. Okay, so you can find all these scripts on my GitHub, all right, the pickup item, whatever. You can find all that in the description, and you're going to go ahead and click on your cube, and you need to put the pickup script onto the cube, and then you will right click, and item has is a scriptable object, and it gives you access now. When you right click, you'll go to create, and then you'll have an item object that you can create. So go ahead and create an item, and let's call it key. We're going to change the name of the item to key with a capital K, and then we'll find the sprite for the key, and we'll set that up. Okay, now we'll go back and click on the key, and we will drop that into item that gets picked up. Okay, now that we've got our cube set up and it's allowed to be picked up, we're going to go ahead and open item. We're in a new namespace. I've called this namespace Simple Inventory, and that helps us separate this part of the game from other parts of your game. Okay, so you don't want items to have conflicts with other part of your project. Okay, you're going to want to use the create asset menu attribute that allows you to right click in the project view and create a new item. Okay, scriptable object is an object that you can create and reference in other scripts. We're giving it an item name, we're giving it a sprite icon, and then we're giving it public access to those attributes, to those variables. Now in the doItemStuff method, really all we're doing is saying, hey, this guy just picked up the item, all right? There's no real functionality that's in here, okay? Now that's not a big deal. It's up to you guys to implement that stuff. Now, how do we get the item, all right? Here's our pickup script, okay? It's also in the namespace of simple inventory. It is a mono behavior, so it'll be on each instance of a pickupable item, okay? So that box, that cube in the game world, that's got a pickup script on it, okay? So that when I click on it, all right, I'm going to find the inventory, and then I'm going to add this item to the inventory, and I'm going to add the number put on this instance. I'm going to add the number picked up to the inventory, and then I'm going to destroy the game object. Okay, pretty simple. Now let's go to our inventory. Now this is a little more complicated. We're back in the simple inventory namespace. We have our InventoryUI reference here, and then we have a dictionary for the inventory. Each item has a count. So the item is the key and the count is the value. So let's say that we have apples. We find the apples in the inventory, and then we say with that key apple, how many are there? Okay, that's the value. All right. We have a public access to the inventory, and then we have a count for the number of things on the inventory. We have two public events. When the inventory changes, an event will fire, and then when we add a new item, an event will fire. Okay. So when we start, we initialize InventoryUI. We have our public access to add to inventory. Remember, when we at the pickup, that's what we're accessing from pickup. Add to inventory this item and the number, default 1. Okay, so if the inventory doesn't have this item key, right? Let's add it to the inventory. Else, we're going to add the amount to that key, and then we'll invoke the onInventory change. Now, when we click on the item from the inventory UI, we will remove that item and the number of that item. Okay, so if we have that item, we're going to subtract it. If we don't, then we're going to throw an exception. If we have less than the count, then we will set the item count to 0, and then we'll invoke the onInventory change. All right, now let's go to the InventoryUI. We reference our inventory, and then we have an int for the number of slots or containers to create. This just as well could be max carryable items. Okay, so the maximum number of items that you're going to carry. If we've already gone over that number, then you can't add any more items, whatever. This is just a reference to start from. Okay, we have our item slots. Okay, so this is the UI for each individual item, and then we have our slot prefab, which we made earlier. And then we've got the content parent, which is our content object on the viewport from the scroll view. Okay, when we initialize, we're going to set the inventory, and we're going to create the item slots, and then we will update the item slots with if there's anything in the inventory, then we'll tell the item slots to update their UI for that inventory. Okay, and then we'll listen for onInventory changes, and when the inventory changes, we will update those item slots. Okay, so in update item slots, we're going through the inventory and we're saying, okay, for each key, for each item, check if there is any of that item. So if item value is 0, so if there's 0 of that item, then we're going to set the item slot to inactive. And if there are some of that item, then we'll make sure that it's active, that the slot is active, and then we'll pass in the UI, and you'll find out why. And then we'll pass in the item, and we'll pass in the count of that item. All right, so that's this KVP, that's the inventory key value pair. The key is the item, the value is the count. Okay. And then for all the rest of the item slots, right? So we're iterating on all of the items in the inventory, right? So imagine we have 5 items, we have 15 slots. So we've only gotten to 5. We're going to go ahead and say for the rest of those 10 items, we're going to go ahead and turn off the item slots, right? And then we have a call to this item clicked method from the item slot. Okay, so when we click on the item, we're going to remove it from the inventory. And remember, let's take a look at the item slot. So we have that button that we made. We have the image, which is actually the button's image, where we're going to set our sprite, our icon for the item. Then we have the name of the item and the count of the item. All right. So because I'm using TextMeshPro, I had to import the TextMeshPro namespace to get these references. For the button and the image, you must import the Unity Engine UI. Okay. Now, when we update the slot UI, we pass in the inventory UI, we pass in the item and the count. If the count is 0, then we're going to remove listeners from the button. Otherwise, okay, right? So if our last count, and that is to say that our text says 0, or let's actually do this the right way real quickly. We're going to add on enable. We're going to say that our text, our last count, our count text is defaulted to 0. Okay, so if our count text equals 0, and our last count, and our count is above 0, then we're going to add a listener. All right, so that is to say, if before we didn't have the item and now we do, then we're going to add a listener that says, okay, if we click the item, make sure that we remove it from the inventory and make sure that we call the item and say do item stuff, right? And then we're going to update our icon and our name and the count. Perfect. All right, so let's take a look at that in the scene. All right, so we got our cube here. We're going to go ahead and duplicate it a couple of times so that we can see different items going into the UI. So let's take the folder. We'll pick up a bunch of those, and let's grab a clock and take like 5. All right, so now let's actually change those images so that we know what we're supposed to be picking up. This should be the folder. So let's grab our folder here and make that right, and then this should be our paperclip. Okay, a big change that I made, which will make a difference, is the grid layout view. So I've changed the grid layout view. I've changed from a vertical content layout to a grid layout group, and I've put the cell size at 100 on the Y and the X, and then given spacing of 15 between each item slot, and that'll make a big difference. Okay, so it'll be a little easier to navigate for your user. Now that we have these cubes set up, let's make sure that we get our inventory UI set up. I dragged and dropped my inventory UI onto the actual canvas. I'm going to increase the number of slots to create, and then I am going to put our prefab of the slot UI on there, on the slot UI prefab place. And then I'm going to drag and drop the inventory panel into the inventory UI object area, and make sure that you go into the scroll view and grab the content to put that into the content parent. That's where all of our containers are going to go. Okay. Okay, so on that item slot UI, I'm going to go ahead and drag it into the content panel, and I want you guys to make sure that you set this up like I did. Okay. I went and dragged and dropped the item button into the item button on the ItemSlotUI. So you need to make sure to drag and drop ItemSlotUI onto the prefab of our ItemSlotUI. And then drag and drop the same exact image, the same exact object. So the item button has an image on it. You're going to put that into the item image placeholder here. Then you're going to get the name and drop that into the name text and the count text into the count text. All right. Make sure that you click overrides and apply all. Okay. So that'll make sure that it goes to all your prefabs. All right. And then we'll take a quick look at how that looks and in a grid view. So this will be what it looks like in a grid. And that's a little easier to navigate than would be a vertical content, vertical layout group. All right. Make sure that you have a event system. So right click UI and then an event system, and then go ahead and put your inventory on that, and we will reference the UI. So we'll drag and drop. I put my inventory UI onto the canvas, and then I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop that into the inventory UI on the inventory script. Okay. Now we will press play and hopefully everything works. So if I click on it, yeah, okay. Well, I guess I got the image wrong for that, but that's okay. So we got the image right. Okay, so we picked those up just by clicking on them. All right, so far so good. Okay, so I've created a bit of a world, and it's got a player that moves around in the world who's got a collider. So I've had to change the pickup class. And I added two variables. I went ahead and brought in the Unity.UI namespace so that the image over the pickup could be dynamic. So if we've got an item on the pickup, then we will set the sprite on that image to the icon of the item. Okay. And then we've got a string, which is the player tag, or whoever you want to be picking up the item. Then you set that tag here. So if on a collision, that collision matches that tag, then we will add the item to the inventory and then destroy this object. All right, so let's look at that. Okay, a couple of really important things before closing. So we've got this pickup, right? We just added that image so that we can dynamically put the image in, put the sprite into the image. So make sure that you put the image into the overhead image part here on the pickup script. Another thing about this is if you want that on collision enter to work properly, you need a rigid body on these objects and on the player. Okay, so I put a rigid body on each of these cubes, and then on the player I've got a rigid body, and I'm not using kinematic because then he would just fall over. Okay. But make sure you have a rigid body on there. You can see now that the icon is going to change, right? So that changes dynamically now. And then as he collides, he'll pick up stuff. And we can click on it and reduce the amount. That's it for this simple inventory video. Hopefully you get something good working for your game. All these assets are free. The links are in the description. Make sure you go to the GitHub to copy the content of the scripts. If you guys run into any problems, make sure to let me know either by a message or a comment down below. If you want some kind of different content, let me know in the comments. If you have suggestions for me, let me know. Next week we will be doing crafting, just like you see here, using the same system. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good one.